We have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days. We believe that they will target Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, a city of 2.8 million innocent people.
You are looking live at Kyiv, Ukraine, the capital of a country President Biden said moments ago is on the brink of war. It is 1 a.m. there. Meantime, back here, the Wall Street Journal reporting that invasion could involve fighter jets, tanks, ballistic missiles, and cyber attacks with the intent of leaving the country's leadership powerless. We're going to get to that in a minute with retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer. We begin tonight with Kelly Meyer in Washington. Kelly, the president could not have been more clear. He thinks this is going to happen.
Absolutely, and it's a change from what he said in the past, saying he didn't know Putin had made up his mind yet. Tonight, he says Putin has made up his mind, saying he's convinced he has made his decision here. He says that doesn't mean, though, diplomacy is off the table, and it isn't off the table until Putin takes that step to invade. And that's why you saw the president come out here tonight at the White House, sharing that he's been in constant communication with allies and that they're standing behind Ukraine on this, though reiterating again there will be no combat troops on the ground in Ukraine. The White House still hopes it doesn't come to all this. The president is trying to deter Putin from making this move, saying it would be, quote, a catastrophic and needless war of choice. He also adds that he doesn't think Putin is, quote, remotely contemplating using nuclear weapons. And what Biden thinks Putin is doing here, Joe, is trying to convince the world that he can change the dynamics in Europe in a way that Biden says he cannot. Here's the moment reporters asked again the president if he's convinced Putin has made up his mind. Take a listen.
And do you have any indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade? Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
And Joe, after this moment, he asked if he's convinced that Putin will do this, then does that mean that diplomacy is off the table? And he again said it isn't, pointing to significant intelligence, but he didn't expand on just that, what that intelligence is, Joe. And I want to add here that there is also concern about the Ukrainian President Zelensky about possibly attending the security conference in Munich, Germany this weekend. The president saying tonight that that choice is up to him, but there is concern of him leaving the country during this crucial time here, right. Joe.
A lot of questions about the timing of that. NewsNation Washington correspondent Kelly Meyer, thank you very much for the update. Want to bring in now retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer. All right, Hal, you've thought this thing was going to be a smaller incursion from the south into the southeastern section of Ukraine. I'm sure it caught your attention today when the president said he thought Kyiv was going to be a target. If Kyiv is a target, that changes the whole story, does it not?
Joe, that was a very telling speech that the president just gave when he said that Kyiv was on the table, that it was targeted. What I would say, there's a difference between the term targeted and being taken over or occupied. I have no doubt that it is targeted with missiles, airstrikes, certainly cyber attacks. And you may actually see an incursion from the north, from Belarus, where they go down south.
Right.
But going into the city itself takes a tremendous amount of force. Urban warfare, the defenders have a huge advantage. And I don't know if the Russians have the type of forces that will allow them to go into a well-defended Kyiv and actually take over the city, at least in short order. It'd take a long time.
Wow. Well, I mean, you're hearing that the U.S. is expecting Russia to use fighter jets, as we mentioned, tanks, add in ballistic missiles, cyber warfare. This doesn't sound like a skirmish at the border, Hal. This sounds like full-fledged war.
Well, it will be war. Even if they take just that eastern quadrant, that southeastern quadrant, even if that's what the end state is, it doesn't mean that they won't push in on all fronts. And it certainly doesn't mean that they wouldn't attack Kyiv and other major cities and other major targets well within the country. I think that's why you saw everybody pull back to the west. They're actually looking at the ranges of the weapons when they talk about where they're going to set up their embassies or country teams in terms of giving them some standoff in terms of what's happening there. It's going to be a huge attack. And one thing I will say about the Russians is when they bring in jet fighter bombers, their targeting is not as accurate as ours. So you could see a lot of collateral damage. You could see them miss targets and hit civilian targets. It could be a real mess. And you may see a huge, almost unprecedented evacuation of Kyiv. Once it starts taking rounds, you're going to see the streets clogging, the highways clogging. everybody trying to get out of there because they know they're under fire.
Then what, Hal? Let's say this does go down as we're talking about. Then what? Because it almost feels like Putin is saying now, if he's made the decision, as the president says, why wouldn't he, right? Who's going to stop me is what I'm guessing he's thinking right now.
Well, there was some subtle language that the president had in his speech today when he talked about once they begin, that going into the diplomatic lane is going to be much more difficult, if not impossible. I think in Putin's mind, he sees, there's a famous saying by Clausewitz, war is politics by different means. Well, he sees going in there, taking terrain, and then probably negotiating, and then probably pulling back to whatever that Eastern Quadrant is that we've talked about before. That's probably in his mind. I don't know if that's going to play out quite that way. The Western resolve is much stronger than he probably anticipated. International resolve is probably much stronger than he anticipated. Ukrainian resolve and Ukrainian nationalism has really been solidified by this whole thing. This could turn into a very long war, a war of attrition, a huge insurgency against the Russians. In the long run, the longer they're there without being able to negotiate a withdrawal, the more they're going to suffer. And the more Putin will end up politically suffering over the long run as, I hate to say it, body bags and everything else start coming home to Russia. So there's a lot of considerations on what's going on. And I think we're trying to find that last off-ramp diplomatically before they actually cross the line of departure.
Right. What do you make of President Zelensky going to this security conference in Munich? I guess the question is, why would he go now if this is, in fact, as imminent as it appears? Is this a window for Putin if he decides to do it? And how would Zelensky get back?
Well, Joe, I'm not sure that he's going to go at this point. There is intelligence that obviously we don't know. I'm trying to read the tea leaves based on what the president said. The intelligence has obviously become very compelling. The things I listened for today, which were big, one was obviously targeting Kyiv. That was on the table. Obviously, if you're saying that publicly, I imagine we have a lot more privately that we cannot share. The other is that Putin has made up his mind. Mm-hmm. And that tells me there's some very strong intelligence. We may actually have a very good idea of exactly when the time of attack is going to kick off. We're not going to say it publicly, but we may actually have a very good idea of which way they're coming, how they're coming, when they're coming. So all that may be in their mind. And with intelligence like that, that has to change Zelensky's thinking. Do I want to go to Munich or not? As a head of state, as the head of the armed forces, being out of the country when your country is attacked is not a good idea. And that may change the math in terms of what he's doing. I wouldn't be surprised if he turns it off.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised.
There's been a lot, Hal said, about these false flag operations. The U.S. has been talking about this extensively, and now perhaps we're learning more about why, because we're seeing many of these false flags, or I guess what they call them, like staged provocations, play out in eastern Ukraine.
Joe, what these are, and I think we've done this from an information operations standpoint. We've done a pretty good job of basically showing Putin's hand. When he stages these things, when he tries to create these pretexts, we're very overt. We said it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. There it is. The attack on the kindergarten, the shelling out there. Of course, the Russian separatists are now evacuating Russian civilians out of the eastern Ukraine. All of this is a pure pretext. One thing that didn't get as much mention was that there was a Russian report that they had thwarted a chlorine attack by the Ukrainians. That's interesting because under international law, chlorine gas, as you know, that's a chemical weapon.
Right.
That's a weapon the Syrians use. And when you're saying that, you're getting into that weapons of mass destruction piece that they can make a claim. There's nothing to it. I fully believe that was completely fabricated by Putin, but it gives them some rhetoric to play with, which kind of harkens back to the rhetoric that we heard, say, 2 decades ago prior to Iraq.
All right, it's retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer. It's always good to have you, Hal. Semper Fi. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.